Good Vach, Shavua Tov. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Karen in Northern California, Ella's in the house, Marjorie in Georgia, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is Chaf Hey. Page 25 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Working our way through chapter 2. Tonight, opening Mishna number 10, right at the top of page 25a. Quick reminder, tomorrow, Sunday, we're going to a wedding. So special time class at noon Pacific, the Friday schedule. Tomorrow, Sunday, class at noon Pacific, because Nina and I are going to a wedding. And we'll put an announcement on the Facebook page. Okay, Mishnah number 10. One must distance animal carcasses and graves and a tannery, places where hides are processed, 50 cubits from the city, right? These are smelly, toxic substances, foul odors are emitted from these types of things, whether we're talking about graves, carcasses, or especially tannery. The process of tanning hides really produce tremendous foul odors. So this has to be distanced 50 cubits from the city. And one may establish a tannery only on the east side of the city, because in that part of the world, winds usually blow from the west, and the foul smells would therefore be blown away from the residential area. Presumably, if we were talking about a city where the predominant winds were from the east, it would have the opposite requirement. Now, Rabbi Kiva says, one may establish a tannery on any side of a city except the west, as the winds blowing from that direction will bring the odors into the city, and one must distance it 50 cubits from the city. One must distance from vegetables, water in which flax is steeped, because this kind of water ruins the vegetables. And likewise, one must distance leeks from onions and mustard from bees. And Rabbi Yosef permits one not to do so, not to require this distancing in the case of mustard. That is the Mishnah, Mishnah number 10. Now the Gemara. A dilemma was raised before the sages. With regard to what case is Rabbi Akiva speaking? Did he mean that one may establish a tannery on any side of a city, and one may even place the tannery close to the city, except for the west side, where one must establish it at a distance of 50 cubits? Or perhaps he meant that one may establish a tannery on any side and distance it 50 cubits, except for the west side, where one may not establish a tannery at all. And the Gemara cites a proof, coming here, as it is taught in the Baraisa. Rabbi Akiva says that one may establish a tannery on any side of the city, except the west side, but wherever he puts it, it has to be at a distance of 50 cubits. And one may not establish... Right, a tannery can be established on any side of the city, but except the west side, and wherever you put it, it has to be 50 cubits from the city. So that's what Rabbi Akiva meant. Now, with regard to the last statement of this Baraisa, Rava said to Rav Nachman, what does frequent mean in this context, right, in terms of the winds that are blowing frequently? So if we say it means frequent among the winds, i.e., this wind blows all the time, well, that is difficult. But doesn't Rav Chanan bar Abba say that Rav says 4 winds blow every day from different directions, and the northern wind blows with each of the other 3, as if this were not so, i.e., if the northern wind did not blow, the world would not exist for even 1 hour, as the northern wind is pleasant, and it tempers the bitter effects of the other winds. And the southern wind is harsher than all of them, and were it not for the angel named Ben Netz, who stops it from blowing even harder, it would destroy the entire world. As it is stated, quote, does the hawk, here Netz, does the hawk soar by your wisdom and stretch her wings toward the south? That's from Job 39:26. And this indicates that the northern wind is the most constant. But you just said that the western wind is the most frequent. The prevailing wind is from the west. So this contradicts this teaching that the northern wind is the most frequent. So rather, what is the meaning of frequent? It means frequent with the divine presence, the Shekhinah, i.e., the divine presence is found on the western side. And therefore, it is inappropriate to set up a tannery there with its foul odors. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, come and let us be grateful to our ancestors who revealed to us the place of prayer. As it is written, Nehemiah 9:6, and the hosts of heaven bow down to you. Since the celestial bodies move from east to west, right? So the earth is rotating. And as the earth rotates, right, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. We're very accustomed to that. We know the sun rises in the east and the sun sets in the west. But if we were, more in touch with the stars, like our ancestors certainly were, you would see the same thing, right? Every night, the stars that begin their journey on the east move across the sky and leave in the west. We just don't think of the stars rising in the east and setting in the west, but they do. So all the heavenly bodies are moving from east to west. And they learn out from that the hosts of heaven are bowing down to you, meaning they're all sort of orienting themselves toward the west. So it must be that the divine presence is somehow in the west. Now, that's not to say that God is in the west. We all understand that God is everywhere. We're inside God, right? The entire universe with its unimaginable span that's been expanding at the speed of light since the Big Bang for billions of years, and that all of that creation, right, is all within God. So what does it mean that somehow God's presence is in the West? Well, there's some kind of manifestation of the divine presence, that God enables us to perceive in some way, or enables our ancestors to perceive, and that somehow that Shekhinah, that divine presence, is in the West. And what does this mean? Well, first of all, Rav Acha bar Yaakov objects to this. He says, but perhaps the celestial bodies are like a servant who receives a gift from his master, and he walks backward while bowing. Indeed, in a synagogue, when you're called up, to, let's say, have Pesicha, to open and close the Aron Kodesh, the ark where the Sefer Torahs are stored. After you finish, you back away from it, right, out of respect to Holy Scripture. And the same, likewise, if you were to have an audience with a king, after you met with the king, you would back away to show respect. So if the stars in their movement are somehow connected to the divine presence, they're moving away from it. It's because they're backing away, and it's that the divine presence is in the east, according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. So the divine presence is in the east, and the celestial bodies are moving backward. And the Gemara comments, indeed, this is difficult, i.e., the verse does not provide any kind of definitive proof. And so the Gemara comments, and Rabbi Oshaya holds that the divine presence is found in every place, much more what we would expect. As Rabbi Oshaya says, what is the meaning of that which is written? You are the Lord, even you alone. You have made heaven. You preserve them all alive, and the hosts of heaven bow down to you. That same verse, Nehemiah 9:6. This indicates that your messengers are not like the messengers of flesh and blood. The messengers of flesh and blood return to the place from where they were sent in order to report on whether or not they accomplished their mission. But your messengers, God's messengers, return and report on their mission from the very place to which they are sent. As it is stated, can you send forth lightnings that they may go out and say to you, here we are? And the verse does not state they will come and say, i.e., they do not return to their point of departure, but rather it says they may go out and say, which teaches that the divine presence is found in every place, right? So when God sends an angel to perform a mission, right, the angel doesn't need to return to heaven to report how it went. He can report from wherever he is because God is everywhere. And the Gemara comments, and Rabbi Yishmael too holds that the divine presence is in every place, as one of the sages of the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught. From where is it derived that the divine presence is in every place, as it is stated? And behold, the angel who spoke with me went forth, and another angel went out to meet him, from Zechariah 2:7. So although both angels were coming from the divine presence, the verse does not state after him, but rather to meet him, which teaches that the divine presence is in every place, and therefore the angels depart for their missions from every place. And Rav Sheshes too holds that the divine presence is in every place, as Rav Sheshes said to his servant, set me facing any direction to pray except for the east. Now, right away our antenna goes up. Pray any direction except the east. We all pray to the east. Now that's because we live in America and Jerusalem is to the east of us. What we all do is we pray toward the Temple Mount, right? So Jews around the world pray to where the temple stood when it stood. Even people in Jerusalem face the Temple Mount, and Jews who are living in countries east of Israel, they will face west when they're praying. So I guess Rav Sheshes didn't have this issue, probably because he was in Bavel, which is east of Jerusalem, east of Israel. So Rav Sheshes too holds that the divine presence is in every place, as Rav Sheshes said to his servant, send me facing any direction to pray except for the east. So Rav Sheshes, who was blind, required the assistance of his aide to prepare for his prayer. And he explained to his servant, and the reason I do not wish to face east is not because it does not contain the divine presence. The divine presence is everywhere. But I don't want to face east because the heretics instruct people to pray in that direction. And so now we're seeing that idolaters in ancient times very often face the east because that's where the sun emerged. And of course, there were many among idolaters who were sun worshippers, and where the sun emerged, they thought was sort of the seat of power in the universe, and they would pray in that direction. But Rabbi Abahu says the divine presence is in the west. As Rabbi Abahu says, what is the meaning of Oriya? which is a name for the west. It means the air of God, like Avir Yah, i.e., this is the place of the divine presence. And the Gemara cites a statement connected to the four winds. Rabbi Yehuda said, what is the meaning of that which is written? My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender growth, and as the showers upon the herb. Now, this is Moses talking in his final sermon shortly prior to his passing. But he gives these kind of somewhat poetic statements as part of his sermon. So this is going to be interpreted now by Rabbi Yehuda. So the first part of this verse from Moses, my doctrine shall drop, the word for that is ya'aruf, my doctrine shall drop as the rain, says Rabbi Yehuda, this is the western wind, which comes from the back of the world, me'orpo, as if the back of the world is the west. Why would the west be referred to the back? Because that's where the sun goes down into hiding, as it were. My speech shall distill as the dew. So distill, the word for that is tizal. This is the northern wind, which brings dry air that reduces the rain and grain, and thereby devalues mazelet, gold. Mazelet, same root as tizal. So when grain crops are reduced, their price appreciates. It's so interesting. When the price of grain goes up, the value of gold goes down. It's an early commodities theory. And in addition, it says, you who lavish, hazalim, who lavish gold out of the bag. That's from Isaiah 46:6. Continuing the interpretation of Moshe's word, relating it to the four winds, as the small rain, kisirim, upon tender growth, this is the eastern wind that rages through Maseret, the entire world, like a demon, Sa'ir, which it blows strongly. And as the showers upon the herb, this is the southern wind, which raises showers and causes herbs to grow. So already we see a contradiction between an earlier interpretation, which said that the southern wind is sort of harsh and harmful, and here the southern wind is being likened to a productive wind, right, that brings life. Now it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer says the world, now we're on page 25b, the world is similar to a partially enclosed veranda known as a laxadra, and it is enclosed on three sides, and the northern side of the world is not enclosed with a partition like the other directions, right? So this is ancient times. By the way, it's not a subject for tonight, but the sages, who certainly did not have the benefit of modern astronomy at their disposal, nevertheless did have remarkably precise measurements about the movements of the constellations, the various stars, the planets, certainly the sun and the moon. But they didn't have the benefit of modern astronomy, and so at times we'll find in the Talmud discussion of the journey of the sun, right, around a geocentric world, right, where the Earth is in the center of the world. Obviously, we know that's not to be the case, but nevertheless, that model, did sort of. It was very much part of the study of the calendar, the seasons, and a kind of astrology. It's different than but it's different than astrology is practiced today. But, there was definitely a Jewish horoscope that comes up at other times. Here we are just talking briefly about this model of the world where the sun makes its journey across the sky. Now, if you observe it, over the course of the year, the arc that the sun traces in the northern hemisphere is always going to move from east to west, but in the summer, it rises in the northeast and sets in the northwest, and in the winter, it rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest. Those directions are actually accurate to the way I'm sitting. I'm facing north right now. That's east, that's west here in Los Angeles. So because this movement of the sun, it's always east-west, but it also, as in the winter, it's much lower, closer to the horizon in the southern horizon. But it never gets very close to the northern horizon. It only gets a little bit into the northern area. So he's saying it's like this firmament, is three-sided, and that there's coverage, as it were, in the east, the west, and the south. But it's like the north is a little bit more exposed. So he's comparing it to this veranda that's three-sided. So the sun begins its revolution in the east, and it passes to the south and the west. And once the sun reaches the northwestern corner, it turns around and ascends through the night above the sky to the east side and does not pass the north side. And Rabbi Yehoshua says the world is similar to a small tent, and the north side is enclosed with a partition as well. But once the sun reaches the northwestern corner, it emerges from this small tent and circles and passes behind the dome, i.e. outside the northern partition, until it reaches the east. So as it is stated, quote from Ecclesiastes 1, chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to its place where it rises again. It goes toward the south and it turns about to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. Now the verse is understood as describing the sun's movements like this. It goes toward the south during the day, and it turns about to the north on the outside of the firmament at night. Round and round goes the wind, the word for that is ruach, and the wind returns again to its circuits, as the word ruach can also mean direction or side. It's also another name for spirit, one of the levels of the soul. And Rabbi Yehoshua explains that these are the face of the east and the face of the west. So sometimes in the short winter days, the sun turns about them without being seen, and sometimes in the long summer days, it traverses them visibly. So the Baraisa continues that Rabbi Yehoshua would say, with this we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that the world is like a partially enclosed veranda. And he cites a verse as proof that the north side is open. Out of the chamber comes the storm. This is the southern side that forms a room with the other two sides, east, west, and south. And cold out of the dispersed parts, from Job 37:9, this is the northern side which is open, and from which a cold wind comes. By the breath of God, ice is given. This is the western side, and the breath of the waters is straightened. From Job 37:10, this is the eastern side from which the rains come. Now the Gemara asks, but doesn't the master say that the southern wind raises showers and causes herbs to grow? And the Gemara answers that this is not difficult. This is referring to rain that falls gently, which waters plants and brings growth, and that is referring to a downpour of rain that causes damage. And Rav Chisda said, what is the meaning of that which is written, out of the north comes gold, Job 37:22. This is the northern wind, which devalues gold by causing a drought that raises the price of grain, as we explained earlier. And in addition, it says, you who lavish gold out of the bag, which is also mentioned earlier from Isaiah 46:6. Rafram Bar Papa says that Rav Chisda says, from the day the temple was destroyed, the southern wind has not brought rain, as it is stated in the description of the destruction of the temple. He decrees on the right, and there is hunger, and consumes on the left, and they are not satisfied. Isaiah 9:19. And this means that God decreed that the southern wind, which is called right, shall bring famine with it. And as it is written, north and right, you have created them, from Psalm 89:13. And this proves that the term right means south, because if you're facing east, south is on your right. And Rav from Bar Papa says that Rav Chisda says, from the day the temple was destroyed, the rains no longer descend from the good storehouse. As it is stated, the Lord will open to you his good storehouse. Meaning, the verse continues, he will open for you his good storehouse, the skies, to give the rain of your land in its season. Deuteronomy 28:12. So in a time when the Jewish people perform God's will and the Jewish people are settled in their land, rain descends from the good storehouse. And in a time when the Jewish people are not settled in their land, rain does not descend from the good storehouse. Other rains come, but not this particularly beneficial rain that comes from the good storehouse. Rabbi Yitzchak says, one who wishes to become wise should face south, and one who wishes to become wealthy should face north. And your mnemonic for this is that the temple is that in the table, the shulchan on which the showbreads were stacked, which symbolized blessing and abundance, this was in the north of the temple area. And the menorah, which symbolized the light of wisdom, was in the south of the sanctuary. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says one should always face south, as once he becomes wise, he will subsequently also become wealthy. As it is stated with regard to the Torah, Proverbs 3:16, length of days is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. And the Gemara asks, but Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says that the divine presence is in the west. How then can one pray facing south? And the Gemara explains that one should turn aside slightly so that he faces southwest. And Rabbi Hanina said to Rav Ashi, an individual such as you who lives to the north of the land of Israel should face south when you pray. And from where do we derive that Babylonia is located to the north of Eretz Yisrael? As it is written in a prophecy concerning the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, out of the north shall evil break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. Jeremiah 1:14. And the Mishnah teaches that one must going back to the Mishnah, now that we've spent some time talking about cardinal directions and winds, returning to our Mishnah, the Mishnah teaches that one must distance from vegetables the water in which flax is steeped, and distance mustard plants from bees. So a sage taught that Rabbi Yosef permits one not to do so in the case of mustard plants, because he can say to the beekeeper, before you tell me, distance your mustard from my bees, I can tell you, distance your bees from my mustard as they come and eat my mustard plants. In other words, you are also causing damage to my property. Since they each cause damage to the other, neither can force his neighbor to move. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 10. Now, Mishnah 11. One must distance a tree 25 cubits from a cistern of water. And in the case of a carob and of a sycamore tree whose roots extend farther, one must distance these trees 50 cubits. This is the law whether the cistern or the tree is located above or to the side of the other. If the digging of the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree cuts down the tree and the owner of the cistern pays him money. And if the tree preceded the cistern, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. If it is uncertain whether this one came first or that one came first, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. And Rabbi Yosef says, even if the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. And this is due to the fact that this one digs in his own property, the cistern, and that one plants in his own property, the tree. And, unless you're directly causing harm to your neighbor, you can do what you want on your land, according to Rabbi Yosef. That's Mishnah 11. Now the Gemara. The Gemara discusses the Mishnah's statement that a tree must be distanced if it is above a cistern. Now, just keep this in mind when we're talking about above or beside. This figure right here, the cistern, right, could be elevated, and so the roots will end up below the cistern. Or the cistern can be, more at the same level as the base of the tree, and then the tree roots might well penetrate the wall of the cistern. Okay? So the Gemara discusses the Mishnah statement that a tree must be distanced if it is above a cistern. So a sage taught this is the law whether the cistern is below and the tree is above, or whether the cistern is above and the tree is below. And the Gemara asks, granted, if the cistern is below and the tree is above, it will cause damage as the roots extend and damage the cistern when they breach its walls. But if the cistern is above and the tree is below, why should he have to distance the tree, considering that the roots only extend downward? And Rabbi Chaga says in the name of Rabbi Yosei, he must distance the tree because its roots form holes in the ground and ruin the floor of the cistern. Rabbi Yosei says, even if the cistern preceded the tree, right, meaning the cistern was already there and then a neighbor came and planted a tree, even if the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. And this is due to the fact that this one digs on his own property and that one plants on his own property. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. And Rav Ashi said, when we were studying in the study hall of Rav Kahana, we would say that Rabbi Yosei concedes with regard to one's arrows, i.e., one must distance his activities from his neighbor if his actions will cause immediate damage to his neighbor, even if he is acting on his own property. So the question is, how direct is the harm that could be caused? Now, the Gemara relates that a man called Pape Yonah was poor, and then he became wealthy. And he built a mansion known as an apadna on his land. And there were these sesame seed pressers in his neighborhood who would work. And when they would press the sesame seeds, their activity would shake his mansion. And he came before Rav Ashi to complain. And Rav Ashi said to him, when we were studying in the study hall of Rav Kahana, we would say that Rabbi Yosei concedes with regard to one's arrows. Here too, because the sesame seed pressers cause immediate damage, they must distance themselves. And the Gemara asks, okay, how much must the mansion shake for the owner to have the right to compel the sesame seed pressers to move their operation further away so they don't shake his house? And the answer is, it must shake enough that the lid positioned at the mouth of a jug shakes if it is placed on a wall. Presumably some kind of a shelf on the wall, and the jugs are shaking and the lids are rattling. That's, unacceptable shaking caused by the neighboring operation. We're on page 26a. We'll get a little bit of a head start on tomorrow. The Gemara relates, when the members of the household of Bar Marion, the son of Ravin, would beat their flax, the chaff would fly off and harm people. And those people came before Ravina to complain. Ravina said to them, when we say that Rabbi Yosei concedes with regard to his arrows, right, arrows, direct harm as opposed to indirect harm, this statement applies only when the damaging item moves by his direct force. But here, by contrast, it is wind that carries the chaff. Right? So when you're winnowing, separating, the chaff from the straw, separating the husks from the grain, right? Just part of the process of turning grain, growing in the field, eventually into flour. One of the steps is winnowing, right? Where you're going to sort of toss the grain up in the air, and the wind will remove the chaff, which is a waste product and is also a little bit lighter than the grain that you're holding onto. Now, where's the wind going to blow it to? It's going to blow it onto your neighbor's land. Now, what are you doing? You're just tossing the grain up and down. What's causing the chaff to end up on your neighbor's property? The wind. So are we going to say it's your direct action, right, that you're sitting here winnowing that's causing the chaff to end up on the neighbor's property? Or are you going to say, well, I'm tossing things up and down. It's the wind that blew the chaff over there, so it's not me directly causing harm. It's not my arrows injuring my neighbor. Obviously, the wind wouldn't be blowing the chaff if you weren't tossing the grain up and down. So it's pretty direct, but there is this external factor, the influence of the wind. So Mar Bar Rav Ashi objects to this. In what way is this case different from one who winnows on Shabbos by throwing the grain into the wind so that the chaff is blown away and the wind assists him? That is considered a primary category of prohibited labor on Shabbos, despite the fact that the act is performed partly with the aid of the wind. You're not allowed to winnow on Shabbos, so even though, that wind is part of the process, since you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos, it's obviously the whole act is initiated by the person, and that's why you can't do it on Shabbos. And that should therefore prove that, it's his direct action that's causing the chaff to blow onto his neighbor's land. So the Gemara relates that the sages stated this objection with regard to beating flax before Marimar. And Marimar said to them, this case is the same as one who winnows and the wind assists him. Just as this is considered his direct force for the purposes of the laws of Shabbos, meaning it's prohibited, it is likewise considered his direct force with regard to the laws of damages, so that if that chaff blows on the neighbor's land and causes damage, he is responsible. I am super close to done. If you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of Ravina, who rejects this comparison and claims that the flying chaff is not considered like one's arrows, in what way is this situation different from that of a spark that flies from a hammer and causes damage? In which case all agree that the one wielding the hammer is liable to pay, right? If the sparks coming off your blacksmith hammer end up starting a fire, well, you started that fire, even though you were just banging steel, not for the purpose of starting a fire, yet it was your spark that started the fire. So why are we not going to say, so if we're going to say that's your arrow, so to speak, why would the wind blowing the chaff off your land onto your neighbor's property not be the same? And the Gemara answers there, it is preferable for him that the spark go as far as possible rather than staying nearby, so it won't hurt him, I guess. And here, it is not preferable for him, i.e. it is immaterial to him that the chaff goes some distance. In other words, he's not trying to blow the chaff. He doesn't care whether the chaff goes, 1 yard or 10 yards. He just needs it out of the grain. He'd prefer that it just fall nearby so it doesn't, get into anyone's way. But if the wind happens to pick up and some of that chaff blows onto the neighbor's land, okay, he really didn't intend to do that. Obviously, the counter argument would be, well, what does the neighbor care what you intended or not? It was obvious that with a strong wind, if you're out there winnowing, the chaff is going to end up on the neighbor's property. So at best, it's negligence, and maybe you should be liable for that damage. But that's where we leave off this discussion. And when we pick it up tomorrow, Sunday, not at the regular time, tomorrow's class is going to be at noon Pacific because Nina and I are going to a wedding. We'll pick that up with Mishna number 12 at that point tomorrow. Okay, just a few questions. Sharon, many people back away in leaving the bima, the platform where the Torah is read in synagogue, after an aliyah as well. My dad, for one, always did that. Absolutely. Shandora, a southern exposure gives you sunlight for the longest amount of time. A lot of time for studying. I like how your mind works. Sharon, when planning our home to be passive solar for energy benefits, our house is built facing south, with more and larger windows on the south-facing side. You live in New Jersey, right? So you might have a different outcome if you lived in Phoenix. You might put the windows on the north because you didn't want so much sun coming in. But exactly, it's being mindful, right? A great relationship between architecture, the path of the sun, and other prevailing winds, etc. I don't know how it is in the middle of America, but here on the western coast, for sure, the western wind is the prevailing breeze. I mean, I don't even know if that's the case once you go, 50 or 100 miles inland. But where we live, the breeze is almost always from the west. When we get it from the east, that's known as the Santa Ana winds. It's a hot wind coming off the desert. That's when people in Los Angeles lose their minds. Southern wind comes from time to time, often brings, interesting weather. And the northern wind for us, very rare. Very rare. And when it comes, it is indeed colder, and there's a kind of craziness to it. And sometimes it's a very strong wind that comes from the north, and that's when, trees are falling and telephone lines are broken, etc. So that's just our pattern here. Joe, pistachio trees have 30-foot taproots, so they go deep, while pecan and oak trees send a much shorter one, but then also send out lateral roots. Citrus and pomegranates have lateral roots that can extend large distances. Everything around a tree can be affected by the presence of the tree. And so not surprising that we're reading about, the required setbacks between a tree and a cistern, between a tree and a wall, between a tree and a house, etc. No question that trees can do all kinds of stuff, to sewer lines, etc. When we moved in here, we planted a coral tree, which is supposed to have orange flowers, and we've had very few orange flowers over the years, but now finally, 17 years later, we're starting to get 10-15% of the orange flowers that we had hoped to get. But the tree has grown a lot, and we see some big roots near the surface, and I'm quite concerned about what's going to end up happening with the sewer lines that are definitely in that path. But, again, that's something that people have to think about. Where we really see that kind of interference in LA is the ficus trees, just that are everywhere in LA. They're ubiquitous. They thrive here. They're beautiful trees, a lot of greenery. It's nice for the city, but they just tear up the sidewalks like crazy. And a lot of people every year fall because of these broken sidewalks that are caused by huge ficus roots, just pushing up the sidewalk. So the same kind of idea. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday, special time, noon Pacific. Have a great night. Have a great week. Good Vach, Shavua Tov.